Anna, welcome to the LEADx Show.
Thank you.
I think I've done, this is episode maybe 250, and you're my first novelist.
Oh, well. It's funny it sounds funny to me being called a novelist.
I guess the first book is, it's still fresh for you. I'm sure by your second, it'll be like, of course I'm a novelist.
Yes, exactly.
Well, congratulations. I really enjoyed it. And of course, the LEADx Leadership Show is primarily about leadership. And I think that while I've got a lot of respect for all the other authors we've had on, there's more than one way to learn about business and leadership. And you've written what I found to be a very interesting, educational, and of course, funny book that I encourage, everyone to read. And we're going to talk more about it in a minute. But I always start with a similar first question for our guests. And,
Okay.
With all the experience you've had in the tech industry, what advice would you give to a young professional who wants to stand out and get ahead in her career?
Sure. The people that stand out the most to me are the ones that show true work ethic. And what I mean by that is really coming to the table with solutions rather than problems. That's a big one. Thinking outside the box is really, really important. Being creative, so that they're not sort of just taking a template approach, but some real thought goes into what the problem is and showing an understanding of the problem, and also the people we're trying to serve, or the audience, or the customers, whatever it be. And I'd say the third thing is really just being someone who's proactive, really being able to see ahead and think through any problems that we may face, and so that they can be prepared for them if they happen.
That's great. And again, Anna, I mentioned in your bio, but I'll mention again, your new book is Sophia of Silicon Valley. And most reviewers are noting that it's very autobiographical. In fact, Business Insider wrote, the book is a lightly fictionalized retelling of working under Steve Jobs at Pixar and Elon Musk at Tesla. So I have to ask, how much of it is true? What % really happened? What % is sort of exaggerated?
Right. So as I mentioned, sort of my background was not as a writer, right? And my agent introduced me to this term called roman à clef, which is defined technically as autobiography that's loosely fictionalized. And that's sort of what I would call perfectly my book. I can't say what percentage of it is real. I would say the mass majority of it. It's just that my real life is my career has been spanned over 20 plus years. And to get all the lessons that I wanted to teach my readers, I needed to compress it into 300 pages. So in that regard, the timeline is not real. And certain situations have to be attributed. You really just have to cut down the number of characters and
Right.
that you come across in your life. Things like that.
Did anyone
But
actually...
most are real. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, I have to know, did anyone actually suggest you get a voice coach?
Yeah. I had to take nearly a year worth of lessons to get my, to train my voice. I mean, I don't bother with it anymore because, I don't feel like I have to hide my voice anymore. But sometimes it does come out just automatically.
So
if I'm meeting people I know.
Again, in the book, it's amusing, but I imagine that you must have been startled in your real life when a boss sort of sprung like, "Hey, who's this person? This is your voice coach."
Interestingly, I wasn't, because what you may also have remembered from the book is my mother is incredibly direct. I mean, I came home one summer from college and she had signed me up for Nutrisystem, the weight loss program.
Thanks, Mom.
Right. I just, whatever. Okay, that's fine.
That's funny. So
we don't filter much in my family.
I was going to say the way you were raised, I guess you are direct and outspoken, but also means you can take it as well.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think one of the things that I hope readers will take from the book that I really didn't want to spoon feed is some of the things that I resisted so hard about being Asian and being from an immigrant Asian family. You know, things like being direct or unfiltered, incredibly loud and opinionated, things that were happening in my family that drove me nuts, that I attributed to being Chinese, that drove me nuts, were actually the things that made me successful. So it was just ironic in that regard, you know?
It is ironic. It is ironic. Now, I doing my homework before this interview, I came across something where you said that part of the motivation for writing this book was that you said Steve Jobs had passed away and a lot of things were being written and or produced about him that I didn't find to be accurate or fair at all. I wanted to show the world my perspective as someone who used to work closely with him, that he was an incredible mentor and role model if you knew how to listen, observe, and absorb. And I was actually quite startled to hear this because you're right. He's portrayed sort of a certain way in most of the movies and books. So tell me more about, you know, your view of Jobs as a positive leader.
Sure. So part of, you know, going back to my mom, right? Sort of, there's no doubt you have to be really thick-skinned to work for people like Steve or Elon Musk. And if you can just sort of look past that in a way, you start to really try to understand or develop an understanding and empathy for these people. And I think I was able to do that right from the start, and which allowed me to sort of get past any fear or intimidation and watch and learn, because he's not a teacher. He's not a great mentor either, for that matter, because he doesn't proactively sort of explain things to you. So as a leader, he was incredible in my view, because what he had was vision and the ability to evangelize it in a way that people wanted to get behind. You know, almost like the Pied Piper, right?
Right.
And he could do that because he did a tremendous amount of work and effort made a huge effort on understanding his audience or his target, and really what they wanted, what they needed, what would resonate with them. Because I think for people wanting to start companies, what they try to do is they try to develop things that they would use. But often they really don't think about whether the masses would use that,
right,
or buy it for that matter. So that was one thing. I think also as a leader, I really admired how he had such confidence. We would go see investors and they always loved to tell him how to run his business, right? And I think that's true for any investor, you know, compared, talking to a CEO. But Steve would ignore them completely. He wasn't affected by them at all. And he had the confidence to be able to do that. But he also knew what he did not know. You understand? So in areas that he wasn't interested in or confident in, he hired the best people to do it.
Yeah.
And I think very few leaders will do that. Yeah.
So let me ask a follow-up on that, because, obviously my work and the company work, we focus on leadership. And if you look at the research, one thing that triggers feelings of engagement at work, et cetera, is when your boss does help you to grow and develop, or is a coach or a mentor. And you're saying Steve was not that. I've got an executive coach friend who tells me, he talks about executive behaviors that are low frequency but high impact, and he calls them the screamers. So he says, even if you only scream, once a month, once a quarter, once a year, it's a very low frequency. But if you're a screamer, it really affects people, and they kind of clam up or can have a negative impact. And
Right.
and you said you had to have some thick skin with Steve. So it's sounding like you're saying like the vision stuff was so compelling, it compensated for him not being the mentor or more sensitive to people's feelings and that type of thing. Am I hearing that right?
In a way, it wasn't about compensation. It was just this desire to want to achieve and build what he sort of had outlined
So it was
for
about the
us.
work. It was about doing the cool work.
That's right. And believing that you had this mission and you were going to make an impact on the world. So but it was also incredibly exciting, and really what made him a mentor in a completely unintentional way was he threw you out there and let you figure it out. And that's truly an amazing way to learn. But you also have to be really thoughtful in some of the things that we talked about in your first question, right? You have to be just really proactive, and you have to work incredibly long and hard to achieve what you don't know.
Right.
So he did that by hiring people that he thought were really smart. They may not have had any experience doing, I mean, I didn't have any investor relations experience when I started. But, you know, there was something there that allowed him to trust me. Yeah.
And the last Steve Jobs follow up is,
Okay.
you know, I'm curious if you think that would Steve have been even more successful? Would Apple have been more successful earlier if he had all that vision and everything you're talking about, but he had also smoothed off some of those rough edges?
No, I don't think so, because, you know, I think there was a certain amount of that roughness and that the unfiltered comments that came out that really made an impact on how the effect he had on explaining his vision. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it was authentic. I mean, you knew what you were dealing with.
It was authentic. That's right. If he soft shoed, I think it would have been very, very different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you're
You know, for example, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
For example, he would have been incredibly passionate about color, right? And that's why the Apple products are so beautiful, right? Is the design and what they look like. But if he hadn't stuck to his guns, and you know, he may have fired 3, 4, 5 designers, right, in the effort to find the perfect color.
Right.
But in the end, we've all bought into it, right? And it's not to say that one color is going to make the difference, but it surely makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, you're probably one of the few people that have worked with both Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. We've been talking about Jobs. You know, when did you meet Musk for the first time? What are your memories from the first time you met Elon Musk?
I met Elon in an interview. I was interviewing at Tesla. I'd come pretty late in the game. I sort of didn't fit the traditional sort of pedigree that the CFO had been looking for specifically, and but no one else had made it past Elon. So I don't know. I had an interview with him. He asked me. It was very brief. He asked me a couple of questions, and one that I specifically remember, which is, you've never done anything with cars before. So why should I hire you? And you know, that was a great question. But I passed.
Well, I was going to say, so what was your great answer? Because clearly you made it past the Elon test.
Right. I just explained to him that what he was doing with Tesla was incredibly hard and something that would require a lot of convincing with Wall Street. And when it was not dissimilar to what Steve was trying to do, and Steve and John Lasseter and Ed Catmull and Lawrence Levy back at Pixar, when they were trying to convince Wall Street they could displace the 800-pound gorilla that was Disney. So, America had not had a new car manufacturer in decades.
Right.
And and there was no reason Elon should have been able to do it. But so it would have been a similar type of challenge.
Yeah, given how your reputation for being blunt, I'm surprised you didn't say to Elon, well, that's two of us that have no experience in cars.
I wasn't that creative.
and
Not that quick.
And it's amazing, though. We're doing this. We're having this chat in July of 2018, and this Tesla versus the analysts and Wall Street is just continuing on. I mean, it's really a tough situation that they're in.
It is, but ultimately, people ask me a lot whether Tesla's going to make it, and I believe they will. I think they've got the right team and the right mission. And, the core values of the company remain intact. Sometimes it's just not pretty getting there, but
right.
I believe in him specifically.
Now, throughout the book, Sophia of Silicon Valley, you sort of use your story to communicate some of these little lessons or things that you've found helpful in your life. Tell me about one or two of them.
Sure. Well, like the 6 minutes at a time is a big one for me. And I've just found it really useful, whether I'm dealing with cancer or, whether I've just got this overwhelming schedule at work with a list of thousands of things to do. It's easy to start spinning your wheels. So when I find that I do that, or when I start to work myself up, or get worried or afraid, I just tell myself 6 minutes. What do I have to do in the next 6 minutes? And I find that it is incredibly effective. So that's one of them.
And tell our listeners, where did that come from? Why 6 and not 5 or 7?
Oh, it came from working at a law firm. We bill in 6 minute increments.
My attorney listeners will have guessed that, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that came from the law firm. So, it's strange that you would use that as a lesson, but I certainly found it helpful. And the other thing I would say is that I don't overanalyze. And so that's why 6 minutes at a time helps, because I think everyone, particularly, it seems to be getting worse in terms of generational, right? I think people are becoming incredibly analytical and almost paralyzed. I see that a lot in the workplace for the younger people that work with me. And it's almost like analysis paralysis. And that's as far as relationships or work. So the 6 minute thing helps too. And I always find deck feathers to be another helpful one. It's easy to be affected by what other people say or do, but I always sort of say to myself duck feathers just to let it roll off my back, because they could just be having a bad day.
Yeah, that's great. Just let it roll off your back. I like that a lot.
Exactly. The third thing I would say specifically for your audience and for the startup audience is to know your customer. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and that doesn't mean just are they male or female, what's their income, things that are basic. But what I learned from Steve is, you want to know what their purchasing power is. What you want to come in $1 below the amount that they have to go ask their spouse for approval. Because then it's easier.
Right.
And I think people forget that. Yeah. They want to create products that have all these features and functions. They've done research and maybe they're trying to reach, small distributors or, VARs, for example. And these guys want everything. But then if you really get down to it, you spend all this time trying to build that for them, but they're only going to pay for 2 or 3 of those features. So that was just a complete waste of your time.
Yeah.
So that's just
customers will wish you to death.
Exactly.
Now, by day, you run Ellipsis, an investor relations company, and I also read in an interview where you said your day job's actually not that different than writing, because it's about, you do storytelling for investors. You work with your clients to help them to tell their story to investors, and
that's right.
LEADx is a startup. I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I'm only talking to my friends and family, like doing seed round stuff. But what advice would you give to a startup entrepreneur as I pitch the company and try to frame LEADx in the best possible light?
That's a really good question. I think what I do when I'm talking to public, institutional investors, and it's not any different for you. I mean, I've raised money before as well. You really have to understand what their hot buttons are, right? So what they want to know is, are you going to make the money, right? And is this going to be a long-term sustainable business, right? And are you going to make the money touches upon whether this is something that is in an industry or in a field that really does have demand? Are you hitting a pain point? And I think if you can explain to an investor that you're going to solve this real pain, they'll write a check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to elaborate or support that, Anna, by just saying there's a saying someone told me once about, ideally in business, if you're an entrepreneur, consultant, whatever, they said you want to be selling Advil, not vitamins. Everyone should take vitamins, but not everybody buys or takes vitamins. But if you got a headache, if you've got pain, you're going to take an Advil. And so I really like the way you said,
That's right.
Is there a pain point?
Yes, and I think that's the big one. And then I find that as the CEO of a company, it's easy for them to be passionate about what they're doing and want to talk about that. But at the end of the day, an investor only cares about that if they understand how that affects the bottom line. So you can say, for example, I'm going to build this world-class media company, which they'd say, okay, that's great. But then when you get into the details, they want to know every detail has to translate into dollars. And I think that's important.
Great advice. So, yeah. Anna, tell our listeners, how can they find out more about you, your company, and of course, your new book?
So ellipsisir.com is our company. That's our URL. And then as for the book, you can go to annayen.net or walk into a bookstore.
What a concept, right?
That's right. But thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and it's been a pleasure.
Anna, we're going to make sure those links go into the show notes and in the articles and social media and everything so people can find your book. It's a really fun, enjoyable read. And thank you for coming on to the LEADx Show.
Thank you so much.